get started, and I'm going to welcome everyone back to the third session, and thank you very much for coming along to this. Okay. All right, so session 3, basically last session we covered the responsibility of team leaders, and yours truly gave that talk. The first 2 sessions are now on the APF website alongside with notes or PowerPoint presentation that the speaker is willing to give. We had 34 people attend the Zoom session of 2, and I think that's been pretty well received of everyone we've invited. We've had 5 people with apologies and then watched the YouTube video. So again, I feel that session 2 was a success. And another thank you to Peter Allen, it's becoming a normal thing for me, for setting up the training page. So for those who've been on the APF website, this is the home page that you'd get to, and you'll see the top left-hand corner, there's the word home, and then there's a whole series of about APF. And when you get to support service drop-down menu, then the very first item there is training. And if you click on that, you'll then get onto this page where it says APF training program. And as you can see, session 1 and session 2, the videos are put up there. And then also there are links to the notes or PowerPoint presentation or anything else that we might feel that you guys would like. So you can see on the top left-hand corner, there's the web page, which is apf.org.au/training. So I will still send that link to everyone once it's up, so it allows people to get onto that third session. So we've done session 1 was the judge's responsibility, session 2 was team leaders. So today we're doing the jury secretary's responsibility, and I can't think of anyone more able than someone who's probably done it quite a few times, and that's Ian McMahon. And I've been in juries where he's been the secretary, and I've always enjoyed the juries that he's been able to control. So I will now stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Ian.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. I'll just share my screen. I hope you can now all see.
Yep.
Yep. So I'll be concentrating on the role of the jury secretary at national exhibitions, but I will get in and talk about FIAP and FIP shows, partly because some of the more unexpected challenges have occurred when I've been secretary at FIP or FIAP exhibitions. And while hopefully these things won't happen in Australia, I think it's a way of emphasising the role of the jury secretary. I also note in New Zealand, they don't have jury secretaries, is that right? As such, in the way we do?
No, we do.
You do?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's a different role, Ian. It's more the recording
Yes.
of a lot of the work the jury secretary would do in Australia and internationally is done by the jury chairman in New Zealand.
Yeah. We have an assistant secretary, and I'll mention that as we go on. So I think everyone knows me. I've been a national judge since '97, a FIAP and a FIP judge. I have been jury secretary, as far as I can remember, 4 national exhibitions. I've also been jury chair, but I was jury secretary at 2 FIP shows, and Malaysia was a combined FIP and FIAP show. I was secretary to both. This is just a statement. The APF has a document. It dates from about 1999 as to the role, and it covers all aspects of the jury room and how the jury room is structured. While it's out of date in many ways, particularly with regard to our use of showman or exhibition aid or various other changes that we've made over the years, the basic principles are the same. And I'll give you the reference at the end of the talk, and also I can ask actually Pete to put it up on the APF website as a PDF version. This document officially states that the jury secretary is the chief assistant to the jury chair and the second most senior officer of the jury, unless there's a vice president. We don't usually do that in Australia, but internationally there could be 3 vice presidents. It's important to note that the jury secretary works closely with the jury chair, and in that sense, what I'll say today will in some ways be repeated by Malcolm and the talk in a fortnight. And whenever I say the jury secretary does something, please always understand that it's in conjunction with the jury chair, or it may be in conjunction with the exhibition committee or the assistant secretary. It's more a statement of what has to be done by the people who are managing the jury process. This document goes on to talk about how jury secretaries are appointed. They're appointed by the APF after consultation with the exhibition and the jury chair. Our process at the moment is that the jury chair and secretary are usually approved first by the APF, and then they, in conjunction with the exhibition committee, will come forward to the APF with a recommendation of a jury, and that then goes to APF approval. The formal list of experience that someone who is appointed jury secretary should have, I've listed them there. They're expressed like a public service selection criteria or duty statement almost. Partly you'll understand that. Ed Druce, of course, was one of the people who wrote it. So the first one is a breadth of philatelic experience as both an exhibitor and a jury. And you'll see that hopefully as we go through why that's important, because the jury secretary as well as the jury chair have to know how a jury runs. They've got to have understanding of the process of exhibiting, the whole process of the jury room. Of course, they're managing it, they're assuring that everything takes place in a fixed time. They need a good understanding of the various regulations and the guidelines for each class. After all, if the question arises, which open rules are we going to use? It's the jury secretary and the jury chair, they're going to have to provide the advice that say, well, FIP approved new regulations at such and such a time, and we are going to use them. Or alternatively, it could be that, yes, there are now new guidelines approved, but they weren't approved in time for this exhibition, and we're using the old rules. Such understanding also includes things like we will often have jurors from other countries. And as a national show, our rules may be different to New Zealand's rules in some classes. There may be state level exhibits that we need to explain to our colleagues from other countries as what the rules are and how we judge. And those sorts of things fall back on the jury secretary often. And as I keep mentioning, the jury chair as well. An ability to manage people, because that's what the role of the jury secretary is. And I worked in administration at a university for many years, and that involved dealing with academics and getting them to do things that they may not have wanted to do, or they may not have understood the government's timetable for submitting grants or whatever. And you talk about managing or herding cats. And in some ways, being a jury secretary is like that, because you're the person who has to bring it all together. And hence the ability to manage complex administrative tasks within a tight frame. Well, at an Australian national, you may have 2.5 days to do all the judging, and things have to happen at particular times. You've got to persuade, encourage, cajole a whole group of people into doing these things within that time frame. And they can also, in appointing a secretary, they take into account development benefits from the appointment, and you need to continually add people who can do this job. And invariably, before you can be jury chair, it's good to have spent some time as jury secretary. And oftentimes you'll have a case where you will appoint, one way of doing this is you appoint a new jury secretary, but you have a more experienced jury chair, or vice versa. It's important to remember when you're jury secretary that the work begins well before the exhibition actually starts. And it begins with the jury chair. And at this point, I'll just mention that how each jury chair and each jury secretary works can vary quite a bit. And many of the tasks that might be listed as being those of the jury secretary and those of the jury chair, basically the tasks have to be covered between the two of them, but the actual distribution of tasks will vary depending on the individual chair and the individual secretary and the circumstances. But certainly once the first task may well be to provide some help to the jury chair in deciding on the composition of the jury. Once that's been decided and approved, then you've got jury assignments, you've got letters going out to the members of the jury. Oftentimes they'll be sent out by the jury invitations will be sent out by the exhibition, but hopefully the jury secretary and chair will be involved in that as well. There's the establishment of a jury timetable. And one of the roles before the exhibition of the jury chair is liaising with the exhibition committee to ensure that the timetables and etc. are well understood by the exhibition committee as well. You need to get the title pages out of the exhibition that you can then send round to the members of the jury. And it may be that that's not actually sent out by the jury secretary, maybe by the exhibition committee, but part of the jury secretary's job is making sure that they happen, however they happen. And the same with getting the list of exhibits, getting the catalogue out to the members of the jury and having a list of prizes, hopefully before the exhibition starts. And the secretary should have access to all of the entry forms in case there are any queries that arise. Some queries may be able to be answered out of exhibition aid these days, but there are other questions that may come out of the entry forms. We often don't have, or we don't often have the question of ineligible exhibits come up for national judges, but juries. But in my one of my jobs at an international exhibition was to go through the entry forms and just make sure that individual exhibits were qualified under the rules. And often the forms hadn't been filled out properly by the commissioners or by the person making the entry, but then hadn't been checked by the commissioners, and then you had to go out to the commissioners and talk to them to find out what the true case was, because ineligible exhibits would then not be judged. The other side of it, the more practical things, we do in Australia generally, most exhibition committees understand that they need a jury room and its size and the security and the location and the provision of furniture and equipment. But the jury secretary should liaise with the exhibition committee just to make sure that these things are being provided. If you come across an inexperienced exhibition committee, they may not understand the requirements of the jury, and part of the job is ensuring as far as you can that the things that are needed are provided, and that includes everything such as meals, refreshments, and an understanding that of what the arrangements are. Now, some of these things you will check when you get to the exhibition, but as much as you can have things right beforehand, you should do so. And then, because we use exhibition aid, again, the jury secretary in conjunction with the exhibition committee, and we also with our exhibition aid project officer, we need to make sure the exhibition aid is available at the exhibition, that the information has been put into it. That may well be done by Johanna. It may be done by a person nominated at the exhibition who's been trained by Johanna, that there'll be someone acting as the exhibition aid operator at the exhibition, who's often called an assistant secretary, and you may have trainees and other people helping as well. They'll all be in the jury room. They become in a sense, part of the jury and subject to jury confidentiality, and they're not able to exhibit under Australian regulations. And that the appropriate, these days, computer, paper, printer, and whatever are made available. With exhibition aid, the judging forms are generated from exhibition aid, but copies of them will be needed, which the exhibition may print out, hopefully will print out, and the feedback sheets will, things are done electronically, but nevertheless, it's part of the job of the jury secretary just to check that all these things are under control and that you're not going to turn up on the day and suddenly find that these things haven't been done. Now, when you turn up to the exhibition as a jury secretary, at an international exhibition, you might actually arrive about the same day as the literature and judges. It's sort of the day before the other members of the jury. At the national shows, you're probably arriving at the same time, but one of your first jobs is actually to check where the jury room is, that it is appropriate. Basically, you'll probably have to set it up. It may or may not be set up for you. What you'll find, as I said, at Australian national exhibitions, it's generally fine. But at an international exhibition, you may turn up and the jury room may not actually be built yet, if it's being built as part of the exhibition floor, such as the one on the left, or the room may be allocated such as the one on the right, but the tables won't have been set up in a nice, neat fashion. You may be shown the wrong room. Anything is possible, but that's part of the fun of being jury secretary, that you just don't know what you're going to find, and your job is to make it all happen. The rooms may be quite squashed, such as the one on the left, or could be quite spacious like the one on the right. The Australian jury rooms are usually somewhere in between. So then the exhibition starts. This is, if you like, a formal statement of some of the responsibilities. And this presentation may get a little repetitive in part, but I'll just run first through these general statements. You assist the jury chair in concluding the work of the jury in a time and efficient manner. There's a lot of work to be done. There are a lot of different people involved. A lot of things have to be brought together if you're going to finish in the limited amount of time that you've got. While the records of deliberations, decisions may be being recorded in exhibition aid, ensuring that they happen, that they are recorded and done appropriately is the responsibility of the jury secretary, whether they do it themselves or one of the people, the assistant jury secretary or whoever actually makes the records. The jury secretary usually hands out the judging sheets and about the arrangements and the feedback forms and exhibition aid, and I'll come back to that topic later on. Advises the jury chair of appropriate actions and timing so the work can be accomplished. It's not just the jury chair, of course, because they're also liaising with the team leaders about the progress of their work and, if necessary, encouraging them. If things aren't going well, we'll start talking about the creation of a timetable later in the presentation, but if the timetable, it's how you think should be, it often doesn't turn out that way, and it's the jury secretary job to be adaptable to make things happen. And it's always worth liaising with, well, you have to liaise with the organising committee. One of the first things to do, again, this is probably more at international shows than national shows, but you need to very quickly find out who it is on the organising committee who can be the most help to you, who is the person who gets things done. Their title may not be Commissioner General, because that often goes to a senior philatelist who may or may not speak English, but there's invariably someone whose job it is. Well, whether it's their job or not, they're the person you can go to actually get things done if you have problems. And that applies to some extent at national exhibitions, although it's usually much clearer who that person is. So you come up to the first jury meeting. The jury chair will open it. The jury chair will give an introduction, and the jury secretary will usually follow that with an address. And between the two, they should cover the whole operation of the jury. But what is actually the jury chair says and the jury secretary says varies from show to show. And part of the jury secretary role, in my view, is that after you have what you think needs to be said to start the jury process going. If it's not covered by the jury chair, then you cover it, regardless whether it's something that might be written down on the jury chair list or not. But one thing that it will certainly fall to the jury secretary to talk about is the jury timetable. We'll cover things like roll call, meal breaks, photographs, etc. The practical things like the facilities, how to get from the jury room to the exhibitions hall, where the exhibits are located could be an issue, simply where the toilets are, but certainly the meal arrangements and all that, and that type of thing. And of course, you've already talked to the exhibition committee and you'll hopefully have agreed on a time when they'll come to hand out the reimbursements. You'll have the jury sheets there and you'll have them ready for distribution, and you'll say, well, I want the team leaders should pick up the jury sheets or come to me and I'll hand out the jury sheets needed by each of the team leaders. But it's also to keep the work going. You let the jury know what they're to do with jury sheets. That once they're completed, the team leader takes them to the exhibition aid operator and they put into exhibition aid. You're constantly providing this sort of feedback. You warn them about the feedback forms. They'll presumably get an electronic file and then they'll have to type up the feedback. The actual mark sheets will be printed out from exhibition aid. And things like confidentiality, access to dealers, well, the jury chair may cover them, in which case you don't repeat them. But if that's not the case, then that's what you would do. It's worth thinking about the jury room security, which often comes down to the jury secretary as well. Part of it can be destroying any voting sheets, but also just keeping an eye on what jury members do with their marking sheets that they're using to write their notes on. It's not unknown them could be left around the exhibition. Certainly, quite often they're left in the jury room when the jury work is finished, and the jury secretary should be mindful of that and gather them all up and destroy them or return them to the jury member. Challenging unauthorized visitors. That's usually not too much of a problem. Most people, once you explain to them that the jury room work is private and they shouldn't be in there, they will leave. Some of them are a bit more persistent. In particular, at one international exhibition, a person had decided he wanted to use the jury room photocopier, and it took quite a bit of effort to encourage him to move on. But no, the security arrangements for the jury room, which vary from exhibition, whether jury members can leave bags and papers overnight or whether they have to take them home. All the practical things will come down to the jury secretary in liaison with the exhibition committee very often. And another significant task of the jury secretary is dealing with exhibits that may have dropped where there are two levels different from past results. The information may well come out of exhibition aid. Other questions may well arise about exhibits, including statements of the age of youth exhibitors or whatever. And as I mentioned before, part of the jury secretary's role is to have access to the entry forms, reminding jury that felicitations are not given for a second time. And again, a question like that may be able to be answered out of exhibition aid, but exhibition aid doesn't have the history of records that Showman did. So prepare voting slips if they're needed, act as a link between individual leaders and jury members and team leaders on one hand and the jury chair on the other. Again, once you get more towards the end, you're encouraging setting a timeline, and if necessary, actively encouraging people to finish their feedback sheets online, get the necessary signatures and approvals from team leaders. So you're talking with the team leaders all the time to see how they're going and seeing where they are and making sure they don't stray. And in the end, everything then goes to the exhibition organisers. While the practice varies a bit between exhibitions, the jury secretary is still there. On the one hand, they may be organising teams of maybe the apprentices, other members of the jury to stick the inserts on and for the results to be posted. Sometimes exhibition committees will take an active role in that. Other times it'll fall back. One of the things to say about jury secretary is that part of the job is making sure things happen. And if that may in the end mean that you do it yourself, but that's part of the job. You do what needs to be done to make sure that the judging is finished. And then the documentation then has to get back to the bin room, which may mean chasing up team leaders or the jury chair and signing things. Another part of the jury process that the jury secretary can become involved with, oftentimes a national exhibition, you will appoint a group of people to hand out special prizes, but the jury secretary should make sure that they have a list of special prizes from the exhibition committee, and then that the prize list is then actually handed over so it can be put in the Palmares and then be used at the award ceremony. The jury report is often drafted by the jury secretary, but the jury chair may choose to do it as well. And that too needs to find its way into the Palmares document. And ideally, if there's at all possible, you should check the Palmares document for accuracy. After the exhibition, there can be a range of jobs that have to be done. The jury chair is responsible for sending in a report to the APF, but they may ask for assistance from you. The apprenticeship and probationary judges forms need to be taken through the process of back from the team leaders to the jury chair, and then the jury secretary should send them to the APF secretary. The exhibition results should find their way to the APF webmaster, to the APF judges register project officer, and to anyone else who needs it. And that can involve liaison with the exhibition aid operator as well as the exhibition committee. And there may be other issues arise, and these are sort of unpredictable. They could be requests from exhibitors or organising committee, or something hasn't actually happened and should have happened. One of the ways of understanding the role of the jury secretary is to just work through for a while, and I know it's a bit repetitive, but the daily timetable. And these are just some of the things that happen during the jury room, but they'll all have some involvement of the jury secretary in some way or other. First, one of the roles of the jury secretary is make sure all the members of the jury actually understand what's happening, what the process is, what the timeline is. And if they don't, then to explain it to them. And even if it's a simple, putting the time of the next roll call, the next meeting, or some of the other information up on a whiteboard so that people can see it. Or you can use a PowerPoint presentation, which is a topic for one of the later meetings in this series. At the first meeting, though, you will have a roll call, and if the jury chair hasn't done it, the jury secretary will encourage the members of the jury to turn up to roll calls at the allotted time. And the traditional, internationally at least, if you are late, drinks to the Presidium. The chair will give a welcome, and the jury secretary will provide a briefing which will cover things that the chair may or may not have covered, as well as the more practical details. A Presidium will usually be appointed. Sometimes it doesn't happen until a bit later at national exhibitions, and then you can distribute the judges' sheets. The jury secretary should distribute the apprentice and probation jury evaluation forms to team leaders. There should also be a jury chair briefing of the team leaders and of the apprentices. Just on the issue of welcome, it's worth reminding your chair that they don't do so, that they should particularly welcome any Accord judges from New Zealand, and if necessary, explain to them any differences in the way juries work in Australia. It's important that all members of jury know the process for filling out the mark sheets, how they change the marks, and basically the team leader takes a form to the exhibition aid operator. That's then recorded and discussed, and the process for transfers and challenges, and making sure everyone understands that before you have a formal challenge, you would normally agree to that informal discussions will occur between team leaders, and that all the challenges will mark the exhibit independently. And also the process for running a Grand Prix and nominating special prizes and felicitations. So the real point is that the jury secretary, one of the roles is just making sure that the members of the jury understand the whole process and the times when they have to do things and how they have to do it. And if you don't make that clear up front, it can be a source of pain later on. The jury photograph is usually part of that timetable, explanation of the facilities, exhibition opening times, meal arrangements. And almost certainly the jury chair will have said it, but no visits to dealers until after the completion of judging. But again, if it's not covered by the chair, then the jury secretary should mention it. The same with jury confidentiality. You'd expect that would actually be covered by the jury chair. So these are some of the elements that you'd put into your daily timetable. They cover many of the things I've already talked about, but they would be included in the timetable. And the jury secretary would normally either prepare that, or in some cases, someone else may prepare it, but they would then check it and be responsible for following it as best they could. And this is just an example of the very first day of a very simple timetable of the national exhibition in Australia. This is the sort of information our jury secretary would make sure goes out to more members of the jury beforehand, so they know clearly where the first meeting is, and preferably you'd tell them where the jury room was, and when things were going to happen and how long they would be working for and when their dinner was. It's important to remember, though, that this is the timetable you might give out to them beforehand. What actually happens on the day could be completely different. I just thought I'd put in the FIP rules for jury secretary. They're in many ways very similar, but FIP exhibitions are much larger. They're more complex. You have many more exhibits, but you'll have a president of the jury, and you'll have a number of vice presidents. There'll also be an honorary president. As I mentioned, that particularly at the higher levels, exhibits need to be properly qualified for the frames and classes. So I can remember as jury secretary having the job of making sure that all the 8 frame exhibits were properly qualified, which turned out to be a very difficult job because there wasn't a proper list of FIP recognition shows, which, yes, it was easy enough to see if someone had qualified as a FIP show. Also, information you had from the entry forms and what had been recorded from the entry forms by the exhibition committee were incomplete, and it did involve going and talking to a number of commissioners, some who got rather hostile, actually, at actually being questioned whether their form was being filled out correctly or not, but some of them were a bit more cooperative. We've talked really about having the equipment that's necessary and dealing with here they're called the secretarial staff, so the assistant secretary and the exhibition aid people, and the use of the software. The timetable, which we've talked about, organising the jury teams, arranging for entries into the award file, and of course the international exhibitions have an expert group that adds another group of people you need to deal with in terms of fitting them into the timetable. You are likely to end up dealing with commissioners if there are any problems or issues. And you're managing the sessions. At international level, I found that, again, it varies on who the jury president is. It may well be that the jury president's command of English is limited. They're a senior philatelist from the country, but they basically will leave the managing of a lot of things to you. You do have to check that the results have been entered into the Palmares. Sometimes difficult to do, but you have to insist that the exhibition committee give you that a right to do that. Announcing the minor awards at the awards ceremony, that may or may not happen. You may or may not have to read the jury report out. But what don't they tell you? The first thing is that one of the key things about a jury secretary is the flexibility you need. You've got everything planned, you know what's supposed to happen, and you turn up at the exhibition and the jury room doesn't exist yet. They may still be building the jury room around you. Part of your role clearly is a problem solver. Something has gone wrong, you need to fix it, you need to make it happen. You need to find the member of the exhibition committee who's going to help you do it. That's really what the role of the secretary can be. And we can give you a list, but on the day it may be something completely different. And the role will be somewhat different from exhibition to exhibition. But you're there, your ability to solve problems, your ability to make sure that judging happens, follows the sequence, it happens properly. The picture on the right comes out of Indonesia 2012, where not only did I find myself, I found myself as the MC of the awards part of the awards ceremony, which was quite a shock. It wasn't just reading the jury report, it was actually, announcing the Grand Prix winners and calling up the people who got large gold, calling up the Grand Prix winners and checking the voting for the Grand Prix on stage. In Australian nationals, you will also have judging duties. So you're not a completely free agent. And you're doing the jury secretary job on top of that. Another surprise to me at the Malaysian exhibition was that I hadn't been told I had any judging duties. Well, in fact, I've been told I didn't, but when I turned up, I did join the postal stationery and the aero team. You'll be part of the Presidium, and you'll need to work very closely with the exhibition committee. So I think that's basically the end of the presentation as such. I think it would help if people who've been jury secretaries or even people who've been on juries could give us some of your experiences of the unexpected challenges that you may have been faced with.
Ian, there's one or a couple of points.
Yes.
In your notes, you had a call of the results, but that doesn't seem to happen so much now. It's a case of post them up on the wall, and it's up to you to check them.
So most Australian exhibitions now, we get a printout from Exhibition Aid, and you get a printout and copies of that, which are circulated to all of the jury members. And then people have to check them. We don't actually do an oral call in the way we used to.
The other thing, felicitations. It's my understanding that an exhibit can have felicitations at national level, at
Yes, that's
FIA,
right. Yep.
and at FIP. Is that correct?
That's my understanding too.
Right. The other thing which you said, expect the unexpected, it's also a case of being proactive. You've got to keep your eyes open with things that might not be quite right.
Yes.
You know, as proactive rather than reactive.
I very much agree with that. In the sense, well, that's what I was trying to say about before we come to the exhibition, but it applies right through the whole of the jury process. You should be keeping an eye on what the team leaders are doing, whether, you know, how they're progressing, asking them informally, yes, certainly.
Ian, who is the Presidium? Can you just tell me who comprises that?
So the Presidium, the role of the Presidium is to deal with issues in judging that might arise. Just to give you an example, if you've got an unresolved challenge and you've got two completely conflicting views that can't be resolved, you might, for example, have two traditional teams, and the two traditional juries on a particular exhibit have completely different views on how it should be marked and what score it should get. Those sorts of questions would be resolved by the Presidium, and the Presidium is usually the president and the chair and the secretary of the jury, and perhaps one or two senior judges, and they will act as, if you like, the final arbiter of those often hard and difficult judging decisions.
Thank you.
At international level, it involves the vice presidents as well as the president. And at international level, the Presidium will have various other things, may well have other duties such as nominating Grand Prix nominations and things like that. But at Australian level, we don't do it that way.
Thank you.
I have a query.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily confined to the secretary. It's the role of the synopsis. It seems as though, as opposed to using a draft title page, which is clearly a requirement, as though the handling of synopsis is a bit variable. I say that as someone who's become more wedded to the idea of actually producing synopsis than I used to be. And I wondered if you or others had any queries on the role of synopsis, particularly in the Australian scene.
Well, I might start with making a comment, but other people can as well. But my understanding is that in the Australian situation, synopsis, we don't require synopsis, and in fact, there's no provision for synopsis in Australia. Whereas in, as you know, in the US, they're insisted upon. In Australia, it's almost the opposite, that we don't require them, and in fact, we don't normally accept them. Having said that, I know that a couple of Australian shows have accepted them. And New Zealand, I think, has synopsises, don't you, Norman?
If people send them in, we send them out with the title pages.
Yes. But it's not compulsory.
No. Whereas in Australia, there's no guarantee that they would actually be sent out, even if you sent them in.
Yes, I think that's really why I raised it, because my own feeling is, provided they're just single sheets and not, kind of voluminous things, if they are sent in, I know they're not a requirement, they should be circulated, in my opinion. But I don't know what the APF or yourself feel about that.
The APF position to date has been that the APF hasn't been in favour of synopsises, and I think the argument that has been placed is simply that you judge what's on the frames, if you like, rather than what might be in a synopsis. And partly, I guess, it's reaction to some of the synopsis, particularly coming out of America, that are perhaps over the top. But the current APF policy is that we don't have synopsis at Australian national exhibitions. Whether that's something the APF, other members of the APF may want to comment on, but that's the current position.
Yeah, and I just want to give my experience. I entered a national in Denver a couple of years ago, and it was a mandatory requirement to put a synopsis in, and I just refused. And they deducted a few marks. That's their prerogative as a jury for not supplying synopsis. But during the feedback, the judges said, look, we're amazed you didn't put a synopsis because you told us everything about your exhibit on your title page. Why couldn't you put that in a synopsis? And I'm saying, well, that's the point of a title page, is to tell you everything that I'm going to do. So I feel that they were missing an opportunity. And in fact, they don't spend much time reading their title pages at all. They spend more time judging the synopsis. So if you're good at writing synopsis, you make it a large gold without actually being a good exhibitor in the US.
Well, in my own experience, I wrote my very first synopsis for an entry I just put into a Canadian B&APAX, which is the British North American Philatelic Society convention. They, of course, insisted on a synopsis. And so I wrote my very first one. And I had a quick look. There's an enormous amount of information on the website as to how to write a synopsis, including templates. And I tried to follow these, and what I found was that, as you said, I would just take my title page, increase it to 2 pages, and it became a synopsis.
Yep.
And okay, I put a bit more information in to get it to 2 pages, but not a lot more. I guess what I would be doing if I was entering more US or Canadian shows would be that you'd actually change your title page so it didn't, the two weren't the same. But yes, that was my experience, that it was largely, it was an extension of the title page because you could write more, you could put more references in, you could put a bit more information, but I'm not sure how much it added.
Interesting. I had a good discussion in Canada a couple of years ago when I was there over that very topic, and had the same opinion that the title pages had most of what was in the synopsis.
Yeah.
And there was other that were way over the top, and yeah, it was an interesting discussion.
Could I just bring the topic back to jury secretary?
Yeah.
One of the interesting aspects, of course, is that in New Zealand, our jury secretary is what you would call an assistant secretary.
Yes.
And we have a jury chair. And a lot of the duties that you're talking about are virtually handled by the jury chairman, as I understand it. But often other members of the jury assist in the sort of things that you were talking about. Have any of our other New Zealand senior judges got any comments to make about the differences that apply?
The jury chair certainly does a lot of the work that the jury secretary will do probably in Australia and certainly internationally. You've got not small in Australia, but you've got smaller exhibitions than you have internationally. So you have a little bit less volume. But certainly I've done a lot of the work that the jury secretary has done in Australian and international exhibitions as chairman in a national.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Bob, just in summary.
Yeah, I think, Bob, also in Australia, because we follow the FIP guidelines, the jury points, we just changed the scoring points, but we just changed the medal level. We really are training our juries to be international people as well. So we do try to replicate as much as we can what they're expecting to see, because nothing worse than doing your first couple of stints at international and it's totally foreign to you about the whole concept. So we're hoping that our people, as they go into international judging as an apprentice, etc., that they'll be familiar with the processes that's going on. And that's why I think we give a full secretary. Also, I mean, we can run a full national, which has 900 frames. And in that itself requires really a two-man team to run that show. So
Yeah,
they're two
I think that's a very valid point, and it's certainly something that I'd be quite keen to see us seriously think about. That we've got a limited number of people who have been jury chair, and I think part of the training process for them is perhaps to have somebody who can actually support them, new people coming into that process. So it's a as you say, it's a team, and I think that's something that we've got to work our way through.
And also, Bob, Ian mentioned that when we select jury chair and secretary, one of them will be a trainee, typically first time in that role. The other one will be a senior person who's done their role several times before. So that way we're building our jury chair and secretary pool of people through training during the events as well. So, I mean, of course, we do run shows with two senior jury chair and secretary, but as we bring new people in, we won't have two new people doing those two roles.
Now, I'm sorry to be a nuisance, but could I just also ask the question, one of the big issues that I believe we should be doing better is in terms of evaluating the jurors. And it seems to me that the jury chair and the jury secretary, the way you do it in Australia, would actually help develop, those two guys together. They will sometimes be women, but they may be able to assist in assessing jury performance. So any comments on that?
Well, they certainly have a formal role, of course, with apprentices and probationers. So they are involved in assessments.
I'm not just talking about probationers.
No, I know, I understand.
They're old hands that may need a little bit of a kick up the proverbial.
But typically we have a
formally we have
assessor.
a judge assessor program, which is part of that process. But it would be reasonable for a judge assessor to seek advice from the jury chair and secretary.
Yeah,
but the other thing which I haven't touched on very much is the jury chair's report. And if something really needs to be said formally, it can be said there confidentially. It can be, and then it was a question that came up at I think Glenn's session. Someone asked Glenn whether he would think that if a judge wasn't performing, would you say something to him? And Glenn's answer was yes. So I agree with you that there's a role. It's probably not quite set. It's not set down formally in the way that the jury assessor's role is, or the role that the jury chair has with apprentices or probationers. But certainly, if there is a problem, there are certainly ways for the jury chair and the secretary to raise it.
I think in New Zealand, it's something that David Lowe has done a couple of times, where he's more formalised that process a little bit more for us. And I think it's been quite valuable for the whole jury, but particularly those that aren't performing, to coach them and either help them raise the bar or they quietly moved aside.
And it shouldn't be, the jury chairman should have the ability to counsel the jury member who's causing a problem during the jury, rather than for them to find out to their surprise that they've been mentioned in dispatches to the Federation afterwards, and not realise that they're causing a problem.
Well, I think that I would say that they do have that role and they do have that responsibility.
Yeah.
Ian, I've got a question about equipment, and that is about laptops, because the information which ends up in the Australian case in exhibition aid, presumably that largely comes from people using their individual laptops and then the information being transferred to the assistant jury secretary. Is that how it works?
I'll just go through that a little bit. Lindsay asked a question about what was exhibition aid on the chat. I wasn't able to see as I was going through the talk, but the exhibition aid, which is managed by Johanna Stafford, is our replacement for Showman. So it's a spreadsheet which is designed to assist the exhibition organising committee run the exhibition, but it includes what gets put onto it is all the information about each exhibit that comes out of the entry form. And then it is used to create the judging sheets, marking sheets that the members of the jury will use. Once the marks, etc., agree, the team leader will give a copy of that back to the person running Exhibition 8 at the exhibition, and they will enter it. Ultimately, that will, well, it produces a number of things. It produces the, during the show, it produces a list of the current marks and award for each exhibit. It will ultimately be used to produce the list of awards for the Palmares document, and be used to produce a formal mark sheet that will be provided back to the exhibitor at the end. So that's all being entered not through their laptops, but it's being entered through the computer being run by the person running Exhibition 8. However, when it comes to writing the feedback itself, each jury member will use their laptop to write up the feedback sheets. They may be given a pro forma with the title of the exhibit, etc. on it. It'll be generated by Exhibition A, but it'll be a file, and they'll come in and they'll type up their feedback, and then that will be passed back electronically back to the Exhibition aid, and then printed out and given to the exhibitors. Or in the case of AusVPEX, of course, it all happened by email rather than printed out. But does that answer your question? So it's a bit of a mixture at the moment.
Well, my question really is it getting to the stage where individual jurors need their own laptop? Because
yes.
over the last few years, my experience is that some people simply do not have a laptop. They have a desktop at home. And another issue seems to be that some of them are just search and destroy typists. And, you know, the first thing they do is they go looking for someone that can type up their comments on the sheet. And I just wonder whether it's getting to the stage where we're saying people do need to have their own laptop and be able to use it reasonably competently.
So we do say that now, but in practice, that may not happen. And of course, the jury secretary can then be faced with the job of dealing with that, including, you know, ultimately helping the person working with the person Exhibition aid, making sure that everything actually gets in there. But when you've got people who aren't very good typists, or they don't have a laptop, they've got to use someone else, or they've got there's someone to do it. Or of course, you've got different formats, so which is invariably you will have, because everyone's laptop is different. It can become quite messy, and I know it has done. Hasn't been too bad in Canberra. I think it's been a bit messier at other exhibitions.
I think
yes, we are getting to the stage where you have to have a laptop. You have to be able to type it up, because we're not going to hand out handwritten feedback forms anymore, and it's not fair on everybody else. You know, if you can't do it yourself.
I think also, Ian, as a team leader, I think that's one of the things you should do prior to the show, is just to confirm that everyone in your jury team has got a laptop, or at least one person. So at least if you had one person for a team, you know that those can be typed up. So I think we need to push it down the chain a little bit as well. But I think as we spend more and more time exhibiting, more and more people will have either laptops or iPads. Either way, ways of typing up something that can be transferred to Exhibition aid.
In Wellington 2015, the jury secretary, and this is jury secretary in New Zealand context, gave the team leader a pen drive with the result sheets, the points on, and for that team, and then they had to key in the comments and give the pen drive back. So that's the way it was handled then. The alternative is Finlandia, where each juror was given a not a laptop,
iPad
to do all their own work.
But there's another way, which I think was how it's done in Canberra, how I remember it anyway, that the form is generated by exhibition aid for each exhibit. That can be broken down into files for each team leader and just emailed to them. It's a very small file.
And now I think that's where the team leader of each class and their team has to take the lead in that, and it's the team leader that then provides the information back to the jury secretary. Or...
No, that's right. From a jury secretary perspective, if you can work with the team leaders, it's much better than working with individual jury members on things like that.
And there'll be different experiences in the teams, and sometimes the team leader might not be the best person to drive that. It might be one of the other team members.
It may be, yeah.
But you use each person's strengths and weaknesses within that process.
I think also we're going to have to start raising the bar and expecting a reasonable amount of IT savvy between jurors. I think the new lots of people coming through are all IT savvy. I think there's probably a few people here that wish they were, but I think in the future more people are going to be able to use email, use USB, get a lot of the feedback stuff done prior to the show. So you've got it set out how you want, and then you actually just put in your comments. So I think that's going to be the way of the future.
Before the show, what's he talking about? It was before the show? Feedback.
Yeah, well, what I do for my team is you get the form that has the jury's exhibit, and I put a template where I say I'm going to talk about all those 5 points: treatment, research and knowledge, presentation, etc. I just break it down, so all I then need to do is start typing my comments. So I'm not starting from scratch. I go in there firmly with what my template's going to be for, and if you're not commenting on treatment, I don't care how good the exhibit is, you're not helping the exhibitor at all. So the key things you need to talk about, you just have those ready. So all that do is prompts you, not thinking, well, what I'm going to say about this exhibit, it's already there. So, and that's an individual thing, but as a team leader, I'd be putting that to my team, saying, let's develop a template so we're ready to go as soon as and as we're exhibiting, I would be typing in some of those comments. It may not be hard and fast. It's no different to writing them down on a bit of paper as you're going along as well. So that's where I'm saying being a bit savvy. I know in a way from Japan, he's the president of the federation over there. He actually has a spreadsheet on his laptop as we're judging. He's putting in all the points, doing all the calculation, and he's already got his history on the last 30 times that person's entered. So he is so proactive as we're walking around. He's got a better idea of what's going on. Now, I don't expect that of our judges, but that's the direction that IT is going for the newer generations.
Just one experience that I had in Cape Town, South Africa. I was a team member. I wasn't a team leader. We were asked to do our feedback comments with Word and put them on USB. Quoted the exhibit number, the exhibitor's name, and the feedback comments. Only to find that after the event, they've been transcribed onto the wrong exhibitor's feedback sheet, so that it made no sense. And one of the exhibitors in Australia said, "What's all this about?" And so I think somewhere along the line, transcription has to be checked and double checked to make sure that it ends up back in exhibition aid against the right exhibitor's feedback.
And an exhibition like that, it's the commissioner that needs to ensure that the judging sheets are right for the exhibitor too, before they leave.
Yeah, after the event, because the team leader, it was handed to the team leader, who handed it in. We never saw them afterwards. Team leader usually signs off. The team leader had not signed off on these feedback sheets.
So wherever possible, it's and it can be hard on an exhibition. Everyone's struggling to get things done by certain times and all these time constraints. But wherever possible, the jury secretary and the jury chair should be insisting that these appropriate approval points actually happen, the appropriate checking. That there certainly have been cases internationally where the Palmares document has gone to the printer and suddenly been discovered that everything's been wrong. The spreadsheet cells have moved up or whatever, and the whole thing has had to be done again. and but the thing is, you've got it, the jury secretary or whoever gives it to the exhibition, or they get it from wherever, and they run off and get it printed without having it properly checked. And if at all possible, the jury chair and secretary should insist on checking decision points and checking points.
Glenn Martin here. I just wanted to expand on Ian's point about checking the criteria or the eligibility of entries, particularly here in Australia where we have half nationals, not only to look at qualifying results, but also make sure that they entered into classes that are actually being offered.
Yeah, well, often they are, and that's a good point, Martin, because the exhibitor might be trying to convert a postal, I'll use this as an example, postal history into an aero, and talk about rates, routes of an aero, but not doing it via postal history. And aero might be that class that is exhibited in, but there's no postal history in that half national. If you're going to do a transfer, unfortunately, you just have to cover that. I mean, that is a difficult thing. And if the title page reads that it's in the right class, and it's only when you start looking at the exhibit that you think this is not right, that is a bit tricky. And I'm not sure how we can really monitor that.
These things, though, arise when the team starts judging them, the exhibits. And so that's when we normally deal with it. People will say, well, is this exhibit in the right class or not? And before the exhibition, and at that point, I was jury secretary, and I don't know what Malcolm was saying, as jury chair or whatever, but those decisions should be made when the jury meets and the team starts looking at the exhibits, and they say, well, this clearly isn't in the wrong class. This clearly is in the wrong class. And part of the jury secretary's job with the jury chair again is just to make sure that people understand the process. If you do think an exhibit is not in the correct class, please come and tell us early. If it's obvious, we'll just transfer it. If it's could go one way or the other, we may have it judged in both classes. But it's one of those jury processes that the people managing the jury need to make sure that the team leaders understand what the process is, and for that process to then happen.
I would also point out that some of that should be intercepted by the exhibition secretary before an entry even gets accepted.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
If it's obvious, I agree. And certainly, I know in Canberra cases where people have been emailed to say, did you really mean to enter this class? There are sometimes, though, that the exhibition committee should not go too far, because you don't know what the exhibit is, and you can't necessarily tell by the title or description. You certainly can't tell whether it's thematic, maximately, or potentially open. And if the exhibitor has asked for it to go into a class when it could go into one or other class, then at least initially that's where it should start, I think. It's just that I have seen discussions involving exhibition committees that have gone far too far in making those decisions rather than leaving them to the judges.
Yeah.
But if it's clear, or if you're in doubt and you just want to clarify it, the exhibition committee can and should bring the exhibitor.
Yeah, I think also, Martin, the hardest one is first-time exhibitors not realising what classes are, and also that you should concentrate on that class, because how many times you see someone's put in trad and they've put in a bit of postal history, postal stationery, they found a bit of open, because they just think this is everything they've got and they'll put it in, and it's really their first time. And you've really had to spend a bit of time with them, giving them a good feedback to say, let's just pull out these items, let's concentrate if this is what you're going to do. I think the other one is we've got to be careful of what feedback was given to the exhibitor, because I've seen where someone said, look, this is a good attempt of open, it doesn't quite cut it. You should consider, postal history 2C, because this is more social than open. And so they go and do that, but they've still done it with an open background. So they've done their best to follow the advice of the juror, but when we judge it, we say, no, this is really hasn't improved at all and should still be an open. So I think we do have to be a little bit flexible on there, but the real issue is moving it to a class that's not there. You're just going to you have to get someone within the team to be able to judge it in the class.
That's how we've handled it in Canberra a couple of times, where we've had exhibits that were transferred to non-existent classes.
The point that Martin was talking about, though, is that if you've got a half national, if you're transferring it to a class that the half national doesn't actually have, how do you manage that?
Well, we still judge it. We judge, in fact, judge it. There's normally enough experience on the committee.
Yeah, sure. And I accept that. That was just the thing that.
They may not get the best judged in that class because you know we haven't selected 3, but typically they'd get a reasonable judge.
And at the end of the day, if it becomes a problem, the Presidium does it. And the Presidium solves those problems.
That's right.
We have had those issues in Canberra and we've successfully dealt with them. I've seen an exhibit, a traditional exhibit that has a title that an exhibition committee might think is actually a postal history. It's just the title they've chosen, and the description isn't done in quite a traditional way. But regardless of whether the exhibition committee deals with it or not, the jury will deal with it.
And I think that's a role that the chairman can play very usefully in the first day of the exhibition, is to make himself useful, themselves useful, going around looking for potential problem exhibits, because until you actually see the exhibit, the entry form might be no resemblance to how the exhibit has gone about treating it.
Absolutely.
Just make sure the jury team, they've got their hands full. The jury secretary's got his hands full keeping the thing ticking, and the jury chairman can be very usefully employed reviewing exhibits and looking out for problem ones.
I dare say you'll be telling us that in a couple of weeks' time, Malcolm.
Definitely. I think just another thing, as a jury secretary, you're going to need a runner to do things for you because you're physically not going to have the time to do everything. And we would normally ask the apprentices, would they mind being the runner in that case? However, there are juries where there are no apprentices. So you will have to find someone that's prepared to, you know, rush out and have a look at something, go and grab something from somewhere else, you know, those little jobs where you can't get someone outside to do because it requires being in the jury room. So, but it's nice to do that up front.
Yeah. On that point, one of the things that New Zealand does have is what we call the NZPF coordinator, and they are ex officio a member of the jury. And what happened at Armistice, for example, was that our NZPF coordinator became that runner, and he had to do a lot of running.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. It was a person who had been accepted. He recognised the jury confidentiality aspect, but he was effectively somebody who could do the running for the jury, which I think was quite useful.
That's the jury secretary, the role of making things happen. It doesn't necessarily mean you do them yourself. It may mean that you dragoon team leaders into doing it, individual jury members or whoever else, the secretaries.
Yes.
I just want to make a general comment to everyone that the questions and the feedback we're getting after the session really does prove to me that the majority of the people here would make good chairs and secretaries, because you are thinking about things, you have got the experience, and I think that's part of what, you know, we've chosen the right people. There's a good team here. I'm actually going to stop the recording. I'm very happy for people to carry on with the discussions, but just let me finish this.